Commander Zexhai of the Thrakari Empire stared at the holographic display showing the current state of the Omega Sector conflict. 3 years of brutal warfare between the Thrakari and the Veltar coalition had produced nothing but endless casualties and a stalemate that stretched across 17 star systems. The blue-skinned commander's forearms moved in practiced patterns across the control interface, pulling up casualty reports that made his stomach turn. "Sir," came the voice of his aide, Lieutenant Morden, "the Council of War requests your presence in the strategy chamber." Zexhai's mandibles clicked in frustration. Another meeting, another futile attempt to break the deadlock. The Veltar were proving more resilient than anyone had anticipated. Their bioengineered warriors seemed to adapt to every tactic the Thrakari threw at them, while their crystal-based technology made them nearly impossible to track through hyperspace. The strategy chamber buzzed with the nervous energy of a dozen different species. Representatives from the major galactic powers had gathered to witness what many believed would be the final push of the war. Admiral Kresh of the Draconic Hegemony stood near the central display, her scales shifting from deep red to orange as she gestured at the tactical projections. The insectoid Chancellor Victar from the Hive Collective maintained his typical stoic posture, compound eyes reflecting the light from multiple data streams. "Gentlemen," Admiral Kresh began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets across the galaxy for over 2 centuries. "We have reached a critical juncture. Intelligence suggests the Veltar are preparing for a massive counteroffensive. If we cannot break their lines within the next solar cycle, this war could drag on for decades." Chancellor Victar's antenna twitched. "The Collective has lost 3 hive ships in the last engagement alone. Our breeding programs cannot replace skilled warriors at this rate." "Perhaps," suggested Ambassador Newell of the Aquatic Federation, his gills fluttering nervously, "we should consider unconventional solutions." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what Newell was implying, but none dared speak the word aloud. Finally, Admiral Kresh's scales shifted to a deep crimson. "You're suggesting we contact the humans?" The reaction was immediate. Several delegates stepped back as if the word itself was toxic. Commander Zexhai felt his secondary heart skip a beat. The humans, the species that had been banned from galactic warfare for over 300 years. The species whose very name was whispered in military academies as a cautionary tale. "That is forbidden by the Treaty of Centauri Prime," Chancellor Victar stated flatly. "The humans agreed to their exile. They cannot participate in galactic conflicts, but why?" demanded General Thorne of the Reptilian Alliance, his forked tongue tasting the air nervously. "I've read the historical records. The official documents cite unspecified violations of the Galactic Convention on Warfare. What exactly did they do?" The question hung in the air like a plasma charge. Commander Zexhai realized he didn't actually know the answer. His education had covered the major wars of the past millennium, but the human conflicts were always glossed over, treated as a minor footnote. The Treaty of Centauri Prime was simply presented as fact. Humans were banned from warfare. And that was that. Admiral Kresh's scales had shifted to a pale yellow, a color Zexhai had never seen on a Draconic before. "The records are classified at the highest levels," she said quietly. "Only the Supreme Council has access to the complete files." "Then perhaps," Ambassador Newell pressed, "it's time those files were opened. If we're facing extinction in this war, shouldn't we understand all our options?" "The humans number only a few billion," scoffed General Thorne. "How could such a small population make a difference in a conflict of this scale?" It was true. The human homeworld, Earth, was a backwater planet in an unremarkable system. Their population was tiny compared to the major galactic powers. The Thrakari Empire alone commanded worlds with trillions of citizens. What could a handful of humans possibly offer? "Size isn't everything," Admiral Kresh said softly. "The Veltar have smaller numbers than us as well, yet here we are." "I vote to open the files," Ambassador Newell declared. "We need to understand what we're dealing with." One by one, the other delegates agreed. Commander Zexhai found himself nodding along, curiosity overcoming his military training. What could the humans have done that was so terrible they were banned from all galactic conflicts? 3 hours later, they had their answer. Or rather, they had more questions. The classified files painted a picture that made no sense. The humans had participated in exactly 4 galactic conflicts before their ban. In the first, they had served as auxiliary forces for the Andromedan Republic, contributing a single fleet to a minor border skirmish. In the second, they had provided technological support to the Crystal Consortium during their war with the Silicon Collective. The third conflict saw human medics and engineers working with the Plasma Federation against pirate incursions. But it was the fourth conflict that changed everything. The Great War of the Trinary Nebula, where the ancient enemy known as the Devourers had emerged from dark space to consume entire star systems. Every major power in the galaxy had united to fight this threat. The humans had contributed 3 fleets and approximately 50,000 ground troops. What happened next was documented in excruciating detail, yet somehow made less sense the more HFY read. The war had lasted 6 years. For the first 5, the combined galactic forces had been slowly losing ground, world after world falling to the Devourers' seemingly endless hunger. Then the humans had requested permission to try something different. The next entry in the files was simply, Human Strategy Implemented. Devourer Threat Neutralized within 6 months. Emergency Session of Galactic Council convened. Commander HFY scrolled through page after page of debates, arguments, and discussions between the galaxy's leaders. Words like unprecedented, disturbing, and unacceptable appeared repeatedly. But nowhere did the files explain exactly what the humans had done. The final entry was the Treaty of Centauri Prime itself, banning humans from participating in any galactic military action. The humans had signed willingly, their representative stating only, "We understand your concerns. We agree to your terms." Admiral Kresh closed the file display. "Well," she said, her scales now a mottled pattern of confusion, "that tells us nothing useful." But Commander HFY wasn't so sure. Something about the human response bothered him. They had agreed too easily, too readily. It was almost as if they had expected to be banned, as if they knew exactly what they had done and why it terrified everyone else. 3 days after reviewing the classified files, Commander HFY found himself aboard a diplomatic transport, heading toward the outer rim of the galaxy. The Council of War had made a decision that surprised everyone, including themselves. They would send a small delegation to Earth, not to recruit the humans for the war, but to understand what had happened 300 years ago. "This is madness," muttered Dr. Yelesa, the expedition's xenobiologist. The pale ethereal being from the Crystalline Collective had studied thousands of species across the galaxy, but admitted she knew almost nothing about human biology or psychology. "We're chasing shadows and legends." Sitting across from her in the transport's cramped passenger compartment was Professor Kethmore, a historian from the archive worlds whose 4 photographic eyes had memorized more battle records than any living being. His tentacles writhed nervously as he reviewed his data tablets. "The more I research this, the more disturbing it becomes," he said in his melodious voice. "The humans didn't just defeat the Devourers. According to energy readings from that time period, they eliminated them so completely that not a single trace of their technology or biology remains in the galaxy." "That's impossible," Dr. Yelesa protested. "The Devourers were a spacefaring civilization for millions of years. You can't just erase an entire species and all evidence of their existence." "And yet," Professor Kethmore continued, "try to find a single Devourer artifact in any museum. Try to locate any scientific papers studying their technology. Try to find even a photograph of what they looked like. Nothing. It's as if they never existed at all." Commander HFY listened to the conversation while studying the star charts. Earth was still 2 days away, a small blue-green world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. According to the navigation computer, it was home to just over 8 billion humans, making it one of the less populated worlds in known space. Their technology level was rated as moderate. They had achieved faster-than-light travel and energy weapons, but nothing that seemed particularly advanced compared to the major galactic powers. "Perhaps we're overthinking this," suggested Ambassador Flintar, the expedition's diplomatic representative. The tall, graceful being from the ethereal planes rarely spoke, but when he did, others listened. "Maybe the humans simply got lucky. Maybe they found some weakness in the Devourers that others missed. For 6 months?" Professor Kethmore's voice took on a skeptical tone. "Every major military mind in the galaxy had been studying the Devourers for years. The Andromedan Republic's war computers ran billions of simulations. The Hive Collective's tactical drones analyzed every possible approach. The Crystal Consortium's predictive matrices calculated every conceivable strategy. Nothing worked. Then the humans try something different, and suddenly the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known simply vanishes? The transport shuddered slightly as it dropped out of hyperspace. Through the viewports, they could see the Sol system spreading out before them. It looked ordinary. A single yellow star with several planets, a few asteroid belts, nothing that suggested it was home to anything exceptional. Incoming transmission, announced the ship's AI. This is Earth Space Control. Please state your business and prepare for escort to Luna Station. The voice that came through the speakers was distinctly human, deeper than most galactic species with unusual tonal variations. Commander Zexai had heard human voices before in diplomatic recordings, but something about this one made his scales tingle with unease. This is Ambassador Flintar of the Galactic Council, their diplomat responded. We request permission to visit Earth on a matter of historical research. There was a pause. When the human voice returned, there was something different about it. Amused, perhaps. Historical research. How interesting. Please proceed to Luna Station. A representative will meet you there. As their transport was guided through the solar system by automated beacons, Commander Zexai couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Not just by the orbital defense platforms, those were visible and expected, but by something else. Something patient and calculating. Luna Station turned out to be a modest facility built into Earth's moon. Compared to the massive trade hubs and military stations of the core worlds, it seemed almost quaint. But as they docked, Commander Zexai noticed details that made him uneasy. The docking clamps that secured their ship moved with unusual precision. The sensor arrays tracking their approach were more sophisticated than they appeared. And the human who met them at the airlock, "Welcome to the Sol system," the human said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm Captain Sarah Chen, Earth's liaison for galactic affairs. I understand you're here about the old war." Captain Chen appeared to be middle-aged by human standards, with graying hair and lines around her eyes that suggested extensive experience. She moved with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to command, but there was something else in her bearing that Commander Zexai couldn't identify. Something that made his instincts whisper warnings. "Captain Chen," Ambassador Flintar began diplomatically, "we're hoping to understand the events that led to the Treaty of Centauri Prime. The official records are incomplete." "Ah," Captain Chen said, that same not-quite smile playing across her features. "You want to know what we did to get ourselves banned from your wars." "If you would be so kind," Professor Kethmore interjected, his scholarly excitement overcoming his nervousness. "The historical record shows that you eliminated the Devourer threat in just 6 months after years of galactic stalemate." "How?" Captain Chen was quiet for a long moment, studying each member of the delegation in turn. When her gaze fell on Commander Zexai, he felt as if she was looking not just at him but through him, measuring him in ways he didn't understand. "Tell me," she said finally, "how familiar are you with human nature?" "We've studied the basic psychological profiles," Dr. Yelesa responded. "Humans are classified as a social species with moderate aggression levels and above-average problem-solving abilities. Your emotional range is broader than most species, and you show unusual attachment to abstract concepts like honor and justice." "That's the diplomatic assessment," Captain Chen agreed. "Very careful, very polite. But what does it really tell you about us?" The question hung in the air. Commander Zexai realized he couldn't answer it. Despite having access to hundreds of reports about human behavior and capabilities, he felt like he understood them less now than when he'd started. "Here's what your reports don't mention," Captain Chen continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. "Humans don't just solve problems. We become obsessed with them. We don't just fight wars. We study our enemies until we understand them better than they understand themselves. And we don't just win conflicts." She paused, and when she spoke again, her words carried a weight that made the air in the station seem thicker. "We make sure they can never threaten anyone else again." Something in her tone made Commander Zexai's secondary hearts race. This wasn't bragging or posturing. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with the calm certainty of someone describing the weather. "The Devourers," Captain Chen said softly, "made the mistake of threatening our neighbors, so we studied them. We learned everything about them, and then we made sure they would never be a problem again." "But how?" Professor Kethmore pressed. "What did you do?" Captain Chen's smile finally reached her eyes. And Commander HFY suddenly understood why the galaxy had been so eager to ban humans from warfare. "Why don't you come to Earth," she said, "and we'll show you." The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere as Commander HFY pressed his face to the viewport, watching the world below unfold in ways that defied his expectations. The planet wasn't the militarized fortress he had imagined. Instead, he saw sprawling cities connected by transportation networks, vast agricultural regions, and large areas that appeared to be preserved wilderness. It looked peaceful, almost pastoral. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Captain Chen said from the pilot's seat. "Hard to believe this is the world that terrified your entire galaxy." Dr. Yilessa's crystalline form shifted nervously. "No offense, Captain, but your world appears quite ordinary. Where are the military installations? The weapons factories? The training grounds?" Captain Chen's laugh was warm and genuine. "Oh, those are here too. You're just not seeing them yet. The thing about humans is that we've learned to hide in plain sight." They landed at what appeared to be a civilian spaceport in a city called Geneva. As they disembarked, Commander HFY noticed that while everything looked normal, there were subtle details that suggested this was no ordinary city. The people moved with purpose, their eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The architecture was beautiful but practical, with clear sight lines and multiple exit routes from every public space. Even the children playing in nearby parks seemed more aware of their environment than typical civilians. "Welcome to Earth," Captain Chen said as they walked through the terminal. "This is where it all started 300 years ago. The place where we realized what we were truly capable of." Professor Kethmore's tentacles writhed with excitement. "Can you show us the historical records? The actual battle plans from the Devourer conflict?" "Better than that," Captain Chen replied, leading them toward a waiting transport. "I can show you the people who planned it." "Impossible," Ambassador Flintar protested. "That was 3 centuries ago. Even the longest-lived species don't survive that long." "You're thinking like a non-human," Captain Chen said with that unsettling smile. "Humans have a saying, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. We take that very seriously." The transport carried them through the city and into the countryside, where rolling hills gave way to a complex that looked like a cross between a university and a research facility. The buildings were elegant but functional, surrounded by gardens and walking paths. Students and faculty moved between the structures, engaged in what appeared to be normal academic activities. "The Institute for Strategic Studies," Captain Chen announced as they walked through the main entrance. "The finest military academy in human space, though we prefer to call it a school for problem-solving." Inside, Commander HFY was surprised to find not weapons or tactical displays, but libraries, lecture halls, and laboratories. Students of various ages bent over books and computer terminals, while professors led discussions that seemed more philosophical than military. "This way," Captain Chen said, leading them deeper into the building. "There's someone who's been waiting to meet you." They entered a comfortable office lined with books and historical artifacts. Behind a wooden desk sat an elderly human woman, her hair white with age but her eyes sharp and alert. When she looked up from her reading, Commander HFY felt the same unsettling sensation he'd experienced with Captain Chen, but amplified tenfold. "Admiral Margaret Torres," Captain Chen said with obvious respect, "commander of the 3rd Human Fleet during the Devourer War." Commander HFY's mandibles clicked in shock. "That's impossible. You'd have to be over 400 years old." Admiral Torres smiled, and for a moment her aged features seemed to transform. "Time moves differently when you're fighting for the survival of everything you care about. Please sit. I understand you want to know what really happened." As they arranged themselves around the office, Admiral Torres poured tea from an ornate service. Her movements were precise and economical, like someone who had learned to waste nothing, not even motion. "The Devourers," she began without preamble, "were the most efficient killing machine the galaxy had ever seen. They consumed worlds not just for resources but for the pure joy of destruction. Every strategy the galactic powers tried failed because they were thinking like civilized beings. And humans think differently?" Dr. Yilessa asked. "Humans," Admiral Torres said quietly, "are very good at becoming monsters when necessary." She activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy as it had existed 300 years ago. Red markers indicated worlds that had fallen to the Devourers, and the pattern was clear. They were advancing steadily toward the galactic core, consuming everything in their path. The galactic fleet tried direct confrontation, Admiral Torres continued. They tried flanking maneuvers, siege tactics, technological solutions. All failures. You know why? Professor Kethmore leaned forward eagerly. Please, tell us. Because you were trying to defeat them, the Admiral said. You were thinking in terms of victory conditions and acceptable losses. You were fighting a war. What's wrong with fighting a war? Commander Zexhai asked, confused. Admiral Torres's eyes grew cold. We weren't fighting a war, Commander. We were solving a problem, and the problem wasn't how to defeat the Devourers. She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. The problem was how to make sure they could never threaten anyone again. Ever. The holographic display shifted, showing detailed anatomical and technological scans of Devourer specimens. Commander Zexhai studied the data with growing unease. The level of detail was extraordinary. Genetic sequences, psychological profiles, technological specifications, even what appeared to be cultural and philosophical analyses. We spent the first 5 years of the war studying them, Admiral Torres explained. Not just their military capabilities, but everything. Their biology, their psychology, their history, their motivations, their fears. We learned their language, understood their religion, mapped their social structures. We became experts on what it meant to be a devourer. That's thorough, Ambassador Flintar said uncertainly. Thorough doesn't begin to describe it, Admiral Torres replied. We didn't just study them as enemies. We studied them as a species. We understood them better than they understood themselves. Dr. Yelesa's form flickered with agitation. But how does understanding lead to their complete elimination? Admiral Torres smiled, and Commander Zexhai finally recognized what had been bothering him about human expressions. Their smiles weren't just emotional displays. They were predictions of future events. When you truly understand something, the Admiral said, you know exactly how to destroy it. She manipulated the display, showing a series of tactical movements that seemed almost like a dance. The Galactic fleets had been trying to fight the Devourers ship to ship, world to world. But we realized that the Devourers weren't just an enemy to be defeated. They were a system to be understood and then systematically dismantled. We identified the critical nodes in their civilization, Captain Chen added. Not just military targets, but psychological ones, cultural ones, biological ones. We found their homeworld, Admiral Torres continued. Not just their current base of operations, but their original birth world. The place where their entire species had evolved, where their deepest cultural and genetic memories were rooted. Professor Kethmore's photographic eyes focused intently. And you attacked it? No, Admiral Torres said softly. We showed them what we had learned about them. The silence in the room was deafening. Commander Zexhai felt his secondary hearts racing as the implications began to sink in. You see, Admiral Torres continued, the Devourers weren't just mindless destroyers. They were running from something. Something in their own past that they couldn't face. Something that had driven them to become what they were. She leaned back in her chair, her ancient eyes holding secrets that Commander Zexhai wasn't sure he wanted to know. So we forced them to face it. We made them remember what they had been before they became Devourers. We showed them what they had lost, what they had destroyed in themselves. And then, Dr. Yelesa whispered, Admiral Torres's smile became genuinely sad. Then they chose to stop existing. All of them. Everywhere. At the same time. The weight of that statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Commander Zexhai realized his hands were shaking. We didn't destroy the Devourers, Admiral Torres said quietly. We convinced them to destroy themselves. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Dr. Yelesa's crystalline form began to fracture along stress lines, a sure sign of extreme distress among her species. That's not warfare, she whispered. That's something else entirely. Admiral Torres studied the xenobiologist with the patience of someone who had lived through centuries of difficult conversations. What would you call it, Doctor? Genocide, Professor Kethmore said flatly, his tentacles writhing in agitation. You committed genocide against an entire species using psychological torture. Did we? Captain Chen asked, her voice deceptively mild. Define genocide for me, Professor. The deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that group, Professor Kethmore recited from memory. Interesting definition, Admiral Torres mused. But we didn't kill them. We didn't even harm them physically. We simply showed them the truth about themselves. Commander Zexai felt sick. You drove them to mass suicide. How is that different from murder? Because, Admiral Torres said calmly, they chose. Every single one of them made a conscious decision based on complete information about who they were and what they had become. We gave them the gift of perfect self-knowledge. Gift. Ambassador Flintar's ethereal form flickered with outrage. You call the extinction of an entire species a gift? I call the end of their suffering a gift, Admiral Torres replied. The Devourers weren't happy creatures, Ambassador. They were in constant pain, consuming worlds in a futile attempt to fill a void that could never be filled. We showed them that the void was within themselves, and we gave them the option to end their torment. Dr. Yil-Essa's stress fractures deepened. But that's not your choice to make. You don't have the right to decide that an entire species would be better off dead. We didn't decide anything, Captain Chen said patiently. We provided information. They made their own choices. Stop playing word games, Professor Kethmore snapped. You knew what would happen when you showed them this truth. You planned for them to choose extinction. Admiral Torres nodded slowly. Of course we did. That was the point. We studied them completely, understood them perfectly, and knew exactly how they would respond to certain revelations about their nature. It's called predictive psychology, and humans excel at it. She stood and walked to a window overlooking the peaceful campus grounds. Tell me, Professor, what do you know about human history? The basic details, Professor Kethmore admitted reluctantly. A species that evolved on a death world, developed technology, achieved spaceflight, joined galactic civilization. You left out the interesting parts, Admiral Torres said with a dark chuckle. We spent most of our history killing each other. Wars, genocides, crusades, holocausts, we've done it all. We've perfected every possible way of destroying our own kind. She turned back to face the delegation. But we also learned something else. We learned how to understand our enemies so completely that we could predict their every move, their every thought, their every fear. This is why you were banned, Commander Zexai realized with growing horror. It wasn't because you were too violent. It was because you were too precise. Violence is simple, Captain Chen agreed. Any species can destroy. But humans learn to understand. And understanding, true understanding, is the most terrifying weapon in the universe. Admiral Torres walked to another display, showing what appeared to be a peaceful classroom, where human children were engaged in some kind of exercise. Would you like to see how we train our young? Before anyone could object, she activated the feed with audio. The children, who appeared to be around 10 years old by human standards, were sitting in a circle with their teacher. They were discussing what appeared to be a simple historical scenario. So, the teacher was saying, imagine you're dealing with a species that values honor above all else. How would you defeat them? A small girl raised her hand. You couldn't attack them directly because they'd fight harder. You'd have to make them lose their honor somehow, maybe trick them into breaking their own codes of conduct. Good thinking, Maria. But how would you do that without being dishonorable yourself? A boy spoke up. You'd create a situation where all their choices lead to dishonor. Then you'd offer them a way to restore their honor that actually benefits you. Excellent. And remember, the goal isn't to hurt them. The goal is to understand them so well that you can guide their choices toward outcomes that benefit everyone. Admiral Torres turned off the feed. We call it ethical manipulation theory. Every human child learns it. Dr. Yil-Essa was making sounds that her translator couldn't process. Ambassador Flintar had gone completely transparent, a sign of extreme shock among his people. Professor Kethmore's tentacles had gone rigid. You're teaching children to psychologically control other species, Commander Zexai said in disbelief. We're teaching them to understand other species so completely that they can predict and guide behavior without causing harm, Captain Chen corrected. It's actually quite peaceful when done properly. The Devourers weren't peaceful. Professor Kethmore protested. No, Admiral Torres agreed. They were in pain. So we ended their pain, permanently. She returned to her desk and pulled out what appeared to be a simple book. This is required reading for every human military officer. The Art of Knowing. It contains detailed psychological profiles of every known species in the galaxy. Commander Zexai felt his scales tightening. Every species. Every species, Captain Chen confirmed, including all of yours. We know how Thrakari think, how they make decisions, what they fear, what they desire. We know how to make them do anything we want them to do. But we choose not to, Admiral Torres added quickly, because we also understand the ethical implications of that power. That's why you agreed to the ban, Ambassador Flintar whispered, his form slowly solidifying again. You knew that if other species truly understood what you were capable of, they would unite against you. Partly, Admiral Torres admitted. But mostly we agreed because we realized we had become something that even we found frightening. The ability to understand and manipulate any species with perfect accuracy. It's not a power that should be used lightly. Dr. Yelesa's stress fractures were spreading across her entire form. But if you can do this to any species, why haven't you conquered the galaxy? Why aren't you ruling over all of us? Captain Chen and Admiral Torres exchanged a look that spoke of long conversations and difficult decisions. Because, Admiral Torres said quietly, we asked ourselves what we would do if we discovered a species that could manipulate us as easily as we can manipulate others. The implications hit Commander Zexhai like a physical blow. You'd want them eliminated. We'd want them eliminated, Admiral Torres confirmed. So we made a choice. We would use our abilities only in the most extreme circumstances, when the very survival of galactic civilization was at stake. Like with the Devourers, Professor Kethmore said slowly. Like with the Devourers, Admiral Torres agreed, and we would voluntarily exile ourselves from galactic conflicts to ensure that we would never be tempted to use these abilities for personal or political gain. She stood again, moving to a wall covered with photographs of human cities, families, and peaceful scenes. We learned something important from our own history, you see. Power corrupts, and the kind of power we discovered. The ability to understand and control the minds of entire species. That's the most corrupting power of all. Captain Chen joined her at the wall. So we chose exile. We chose to limit ourselves. We chose to be feared and avoided rather than trusted and integrated. Because, Admiral Torres finished, we understood that the greatest enemy of any species isn't external threats. It's the temptation to become the very thing you once fought against. Commander Zexhai stared at the two humans, finally beginning to understand the true scope of what they were dealing with. The humans hadn't just been banned from galactic warfare because they were too effective. They had been banned because they were too dangerous to exist alongside other species. And terrifyingly, they had agreed to that ban because they understood better than anyone else just how dangerous they truly were. The return journey to the war zone was conducted in almost complete silence. Commander Zexhai found himself unable to sleep, unable to eat, unable to focus on anything except the weight of what they had learned. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Admiral Torres's ancient face and heard her calm voice describing the extinction of an entire species, as if she were discussing the weather. Dr. Yelesa had refused to speak since leaving Earth, her crystalline form remaining fractured and dim. Professor Kethmore obsessively reviewed his notes, his tentacles moving in nervous patterns as he tried to process the implications of human psychological warfare. Ambassador Flintar had maintained complete transparency since the revelation about the children's lessons, a state that typically indicated existential crisis among his people. It wasn't until they were back in the Omega sector, watching the tactical displays showing another devastating defeat at the hands of the Veltar coalition, that anyone broke the silence. We're losing, Commander Zexhai said simply, studying the casualty reports from the latest engagement. The Veltar have adapted to every strategy we've tried. They're not just winning, they're accelerating. Perhaps, Dr. Yelesa said, her voice barely above a whisper. That's preferable to the alternative. Admiral Kresh looked up from the tactical display, her scales shifting to deep blue, the color of confusion among her people. Doctor? I don't understand. The humans, Dr. Yelesa explained, her fractured form flickering with each word. They didn't just defeat the Devourers. They understood them so completely that they could predict their psychological responses to absolute certainty. They drove an entire species to choose extinction rather than continue existing. But that was the Devourers, General Thorne protested, a hostile species that was consuming the galaxy. The Veltar are different, are they? Professor Kethmore asked quietly. The humans have complete psychological profiles of every known species, including the Veltar, including all of us. The implications of that statement settled over the command center like a toxic cloud. Chancellor Victar's compound eyes focused with unusual intensity. You're suggesting they could do to the Veltar what they did to the Devourers? I'm suggesting, Professor Kethmore replied, that they could do it to any of us. At any time, for any reason. Admiral Kresh's scales had gone completely white. The children's lessons. You said they were teaching psychological manipulation to children. Every human child learns how to understand and control the behavior of other species, Ambassador Flintar confirmed, his form flickering in and out of visibility. It's as basic to their education as mathematics or language. Commander Zexhai pulled up the latest battle reports, trying to focus on immediate concerns rather than the existential terror that was threatening to overwhelm him. We've lost 3 more systems in the past week. The Veltar are pushing toward the Galactic core. At this rate, they'll reach the major trade routes within 2 months. And when they do, Admiral Kresh said grimly, half the galaxy's civilizations will be cut off from essential resources. We're looking at economic collapse followed by social breakdown across dozens of worlds. Billions will die, General Thorne added, not from direct warfare but from starvation, disease, and civil unrest. Dr. Yelesa's form pulsed with distress. So we're faced with a choice. Allow the Veltar to destroy galactic civilization through conquest, or ask the humans to destroy them through psychological warfare. There has to be another option, Ambassador Flintar insisted. Some diplomatic solution. The Veltar have refused all attempts at negotiation, Chancellor Victar stated flatly. Their bioengineered warriors seem incapable of considering anything except total victory. They've been modified to be perfect soldiers, completely loyal, utterly fearless, and absolutely committed to their mission. Professor Kethamore's tentacles went rigid. Bioengineered for loyalty and fearlessness. Modified soldiers who can't consider alternatives to their mission. Yes, Admiral Kresh confirmed. It's what makes them so effective. They never retreat, never surrender, never consider anything except victory. And, Professor Kethamore said slowly, his voice filled with dawning horror, it's exactly the kind of psychological vulnerability that humans would exploit. The command center fell silent as everyone processed that realization. The Veltar's greatest strength, their unwavering commitment to their cause, could become their greatest weakness if properly manipulated. We can't, Dr. Yelesa said firmly. We can't ask them to do this. Not after what we've learned, can we not? Admiral Kresh asked. The Devourers were a threat to galactic civilization. The Veltar are also a threat to galactic civilization. What's the difference? The difference is that we know what the humans are capable of now, Ambassador Flintar replied. We understand the true nature of their solution. Commander Zexhai found himself staring at a tactical projection showing the current front lines. Red markers indicated Veltar positions. Blue showed the failing defenses of the Allied forces. The pattern was clear. Within months, perhaps weeks, the Veltar would achieve total victory. Admiral Torres said they only use their abilities in extreme circumstances, he said quietly. When the survival of galactic civilization is at stake. This qualifies, General Thorne agreed. If the Veltar aren't stopped, they'll control the galaxy within a year. But at what cost? Dr. Yelesa demanded. We'd be responsible for the extinction of another species, another complete erasure from existence. The Veltar made their choice when they started this war, Chancellor Victar pointed out. Their biomodifications make negotiation impossible. They'll never stop until they've conquered everything. Professor Kethamore's photographic eyes were cycling rapidly through his stored memories. There's something else we need to consider. The humans agreed to exile themselves to prevent the temptation of using their abilities for personal gain. But they also said they would act if galactic civilization was truly threatened. You think they're already involved? Admiral Kresh asked. I think they've been monitoring this situation from the beginning, Professor Kethamore replied. They have complete psychological profiles of the Veltar. They understand exactly what biomodifications were made and how those modifications affect Veltar behavior. They know how this war will end. Ambassador Flintar's form solidified briefly. Then why haven't they acted? Because, Commander Zexhai realized with sudden clarity, they're waiting for us to ask. The weight of that understanding settled over the command center. The humans, with their terrifying ability to understand and manipulate any species, were watching galactic civilization tear itself apart. They had the power to end the war at any time. but they wouldn't act until formally requested. It's another form of psychological manipulation, Dr. Yelesa whispered. They're forcing us to make the choice, to take responsibility for what happens next. Which means, Admiral Kresh said slowly, that whatever they're planning for the Veltar, it's something so devastating that they want our explicit consent before proceeding, Commander. Zexhai looked around the room at his colleagues, beings from across the galaxy, who had come together to face an impossible choice. Allow the Veltar to destroy galactic civilization, or ask the humans to prevent that destruction through methods that would probably result in another species choosing extinction. We need to vote, he said finally, and we need to understand that whatever we decide, we'll have to live with the consequences for the rest of our lives. Admiral Kresh's scales had settled into a pattern of deep purple, the color of gravest decision among her people. All in favor of requesting human intervention in the Veltar conflict? One by one, hands, tentacles, and appendages rose around the room. Even Dr. Yelesa, her crystalline form still fractured with distress, eventually raised her arm. The vote was unanimous. Commander Zexhai activated the communication array and began composing a message to Earth. As he typed, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was signing more than just a request for military assistance. He was signing the death warrant for an entire species, and somewhere in the Sol system, ancient humans who had learned to read the minds of galaxies were waiting patiently for his message to arrive. The response from Earth arrived exactly 18 hours after Commander Zexhai sent the request, fast enough to suggest the humans had been expecting it, slow enough to indicate careful consideration. The message was brief and unsigned. Intervention authorized. Human Strategic Response Team deploying to Omega Sector. Estimated arrival 72 hours. Prepare for immediate cessation of hostilities. Admiral Kresh studied the message with growing unease. Immediate cessation? The Veltar have never stopped an offensive once they've begun. Their biomodifications make retreat impossible. That's probably the point, Professor Kethmore said quietly. The humans understand those modifications better than anyone. They know exactly how to use them. 3 days later, a single human ship arrived at the edge of the Omega Sector. It wasn't the massive dreadnought or carrier fleet that everyone had expected. Instead, it was a modest vessel barely larger than a diplomatic transport, broadcasting only basic identification codes and a request for permission to approach the command station. Commander Zexhai watched through the observation deck as the human ship docked. No visible weapons, no obvious defensive systems, nothing that suggested this vessel was capable of ending a galactic war. When the airlock cycled open, only 3 humans emerged. The first was Captain Chen, whom they had met on Earth. The second was a younger human with the bearing of a scientist or analyst. The third was someone who made Commander Zexhai's scales crawl just by looking at her. An elderly human woman, whose eyes seemed to catalog and categorize everything they saw. Dr. Elizabeth Kane. Captain Chen introduced the older woman, our chief xenopsychologist and strategic analyst. Dr. Kane's smile was warm and grandmotherly, which somehow made her more terrifying than if she had appeared threatening. Commander Zexhai, she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. I've read your psychological profile. Thrakari Primeborn, military family, strong sense of duty balanced by ethical flexibility. You must be struggling with the decision to contact us. The casual way she demonstrated her knowledge of his personal psychology made Commander Zexhai's secondary hearts skip beats. Dr. Kane, how do you plan to end this war? The same way we end all conflicts, Dr. Kane replied pleasantly. By helping everyone involved understand their true nature and make appropriate choices. The younger human stepped forward. Dr. Michael Santos, behavioral prediction specialist. I've been modeling Veltar response patterns for the past 6 months. Fascinating species. Their biomodifications create a beautiful paradox. Paradox? Dr. Yelesa asked nervously. They've been engineered for absolute loyalty and fearlessness, Dr. Santos explained enthusiastically. But absolute loyalty requires absolute trust in leadership, and absolute fearlessness requires absolute confidence in the righteousness of their cause. Remove either element, and the entire psychological framework collapses. Admiral Kresh's scales shifted to deep red. You're going to turn them against their own leaders? Nothing so crude, Dr. Kane said with that disturbing smile. We're simply going to show them some information about their origins that their leaders have kept hidden from them. Captain Chen activated a portable display unit, showing detailed genetic analyses and historical records. The Veltar weren't always bioengineered warriors. 300 years ago, they were a peaceful agricultural species known as the Velkari. They were conquered by a militant faction that forcibly modified the entire population into perfect soldiers. Professor Kethmore's tentacles writhed with agitation. You're going to reveal their true history to them? We're going to give them access to genetic memories that their biomodifications have suppressed, Dr. Santos corrected. Every Veltar warrior still carries the complete psychological template of their pre-modification ancestors. The modifications simply block access to those memories. And when they remember what they were before? Ambassador Flintar asked. Dr. Kane's expression became genuinely sad. They'll understand that everything they are, everything they believe, everything they've done in this war, it's all artificial. Their loyalty, their fearlessness, their commitment to conquest, none of it is truly theirs. That's monstrous, Dr. Yelesa whispered. You're going to destroy their entire sense of identity. We're going to return their true identity to them, Captain Chen said firmly. The question is what they'll choose to do with that knowledge. Commander Zexai felt sick. You already know what they'll choose, don't you? The psychological models are quite clear, Dr. Santos admitted. When an artificially modified species recovers their original psychological template, the conflict between their true nature and their imposed nature creates unbearable cognitive dissonance. In 97.3% of documented cases, the species chooses to eliminate the source of the modification. They'll destroy themselves, Admiral Kresh said flatly. They'll choose to end their suffering, Dr. Kane corrected gently, just like the Devourers did. Dr. Yelesa's crystalline form was fracturing again. We're asking you to commit another genocide. You're asking us to give an enslaved species the choice to free themselves, Captain Chen replied. What they do with that freedom is their decision, but you know what they'll decide. Professor Kethamore protested. We know what the psychological models predict, Dr. Santos agreed. But we could be wrong. The Veltar might surprise us. They might find a way to integrate their true nature with their modifications. They might choose to live with the knowledge of what was done to them. Do you believe that? Commander Zexai asked directly. Dr. Kane met his eyes without flinching. No, I believe they'll choose extinction rather than continue existing as artificial beings. And I believe that's their right. When? Admiral Kresh asked quietly. We began broadcasting the genetic unlock sequence 20 minutes ago, Captain Chen said calmly. It's propagating through Veltar communication networks as we speak. Every warrior in their fleet is beginning to remember what they were before the modifications. The command center erupted in chaos. Alarms began sounding as sensor operators reported massive energy fluctuations throughout the Veltar fleet. On the tactical displays, the red markers representing enemy positions began to flicker and change. Sir, called out a Thrakari sensor technician, the Veltar ships are powering down their weapons. No, wait. They're turning their weapons on each other. Some ships are broadcasting surrender signals, reported another operator. Others are requesting immediate evacuation to neutral territories, and several squadrons have just stopped moving entirely. Dr. Kane watched the displays with the calm interest of someone observing a scientific experiment. Fascinating. Higher variation in response patterns than our models predicted. Some are choosing integration, some are choosing flight, and some are choosing to shut down entirely. And some are choosing to fight, Commander Zexai observed, watching as several Veltar vessels engaged their own fleet in combat. Civil war, Dr. Santos noted, making adjustments to his data tablets. Those who accept their true nature versus those who cling to their modifications. Not unexpected, but the distribution is interesting. On the main display, they could see the Veltar fleet tearing itself apart. Some ships were fleeing toward the Galactic Rim. Others were destroying their own weapon systems, and still others were engaged in desperate battles against former allies. The unified threat that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 years was dissolving into chaos in a matter of hours. How long will this last? Ambassador Flintar asked. For the current generation? Perhaps a few days, Dr. Kane replied. The psychological trauma of recovered memory is intense. Most will need to make definitive choices quickly to avoid complete mental breakdown. And their offspring? We'll be born with access to both templates, Captain Chen explained. They'll grow up knowing both what they are and what they were meant to be. Whether they choose to maintain the modifications or return to their original nature will be their choice to make. Commander HFY stared at the tactical display, watching an entire galactic threat dissolve into internal conflict. You've ended the war without firing a shot. We've given an enslaved species the knowledge they needed to make informed choices about their own existence, Dr. Kane corrected. The war was ended by their decision, not ours. Will any of them survive? Dr. Yalesa asked. Dr. Santos consulted his tablets. Current models suggest approximately 12–15% will choose integration and survival. They'll likely establish small colonies on remote worlds and attempt to build a new society that balances their original nature with their enhanced capabilities. And the rest? We'll choose various forms of extinction or exile, Dr. Kane said sadly. It's the price of freedom. The right to choose includes the right to choose not to exist. As they watched, the last of the Veltar command ships broadcast a final message before destroying itself. The translation came through clearly. We remember. We forgive. We choose peace. The Omega Sector war was over. An entire species had learned the truth about themselves and made their choice. And the galaxy was left to contemplate the terrifying power of beings who could end wars not through superior firepower, but through the gift of perfect, devastating knowledge. 6 months after the end of the Omega Sector war, Commander HFY stood once again in the observation deck of the command station, but this time he was alone. The other delegates had returned to their respective homeworlds, carrying with them reports that would reshape galactic policy for generations to come. The cleanup operations were nearly complete. Salvage crews had recovered what they could from the Veltar fleet, while diplomatic corps worked to establish contact with the surviving Veltar colonies that had chosen integration over extinction. The numbers were final now. Of the 18 million Veltar warriors who had been fighting in the galactic conflict, approximately 2.3 million had survived. Most had chosen to settle on remote worlds far from the galactic core, attempting to build new societies that honored both their original peaceful nature and their enhanced capabilities. A few hundred had requested asylum with various galactic governments, seeking to understand their place in a universe that had been redefined by recovered memory. Dr. Kane and her team had departed 3 weeks earlier, but not before submitting a comprehensive report that made Commander HFY question everything he thought he knew about warfare, ethics, and the nature of choice itself. The report was classified at the highest levels, but he had been granted access due to his role in the initial contact. The most disturbing section dealt with what the humans called collateral psychological effects. Other species that had been allies or trading partners with the Veltar were experiencing their own crises of identity as they questioned whether their own societies might be built on hidden modifications or suppressed truths. 3 separate governments had fallen when populations demanded access to their complete genetic and historical records. 2 more species had requested human assistance in verifying their own psychological authenticity. "Sir?" came a voice from behind him. Commander HFY turned to see Lieutenant Morden approaching with a data tablet. The final casualty report from the human intervention. HFY accepted the tablet with reluctance. He had been dreading this moment. The final accounting of what the human gift of knowledge had actually cost. Veltar military casualties, 15.7 million, self-inflicted during Civil War phase. Veltar civilian casualties, 0. Genetic unlock sequence only affected military biomodifications. Allied military casualties, 0. Hostilities ceased before human intervention required direct combat. Allied civilian casualties, 0. War ended before Veltar forces reached civilian populations. Total casualties from human intervention, 15.7 million sentient beings who chose death over continued existence as artificially modified warriors. Commander HFY set down the tablet with shaking hands. In purely numerical terms, the human intervention had been the most effective military action in galactic history. They had ended a war that could have consumed billions of lives while suffering 0 casualties themselves, and inflicting 0 casualties on their allies. The only deaths had been self-inflicted by an enemy force that chose extinction over slavery. It was the most ethical genocide in recorded history, and that contradiction made his head hurt. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "request a secure channel to Earth. I need to speak with Admiral Torres." 20 minutes later, the familiar face of the ancient human admiral appeared on his private communication screen. She looked exactly as she had during their visit to Earth, ageless, patient, and carrying the weight of decisions that most beings couldn't even comprehend. "Commander Zexai," she said with a slight smile, "I was expecting your call. How are you processing the results?" "Admiral," he began, then stopped. "How did you ask someone if they felt guilty about convincing an entire species to commit suicide? The Veltar. Did you know how many would choose extinction?" "Within a margin of error of about 3%, yes," Admiral Torres replied calmly. "Dr. Kane's psychological models are remarkably accurate when dealing with artificially modified species. The conflict between original and imposed nature creates predictable response patterns. 15 million beings chose to die rather than continue existing as they were. 15 million beings chose freedom over slavery," Admiral Torres corrected gently. "The fact that they defined freedom as death doesn't make their choice less valid." Commander Zexai was quiet for a long moment. "On Thrakari Prime, we have a saying. The most terrifying enemy is one who offers you exactly what you want. You gave the Veltar the truth about themselves. You gave them the freedom to choose, and you knew that choice would kill most of them." "Yes," Admiral Torres said simply. "That's why you were banned, isn't it? Not because you're too violent or too powerful, because you're too unkind." Admiral Torres's expression grew thoughtful. "Explain." "Every other species in the galaxy would have solved the Veltar problem through superior firepower, better tactics, or technological advantages. We would have killed them with weapons and considered it necessary evil. But you gave them knowledge and let them kill themselves. You made their extinction their own choice, and that's worse." "It's more honest," Commander Zexai said after a long pause. "And honesty is the cruelest weapon of all." Admiral Torres nodded slowly. "Now you understand why we agreed to exile ourselves. The power to show beings the complete truth about themselves, to force them to confront who they really are. It's not a power that should be used lightly, but you used it twice now. The Devourers and the Veltar. Both species were artificially modified beyond their original nature," Admiral Torres explained. "Both were suffering in ways they couldn't understand or escape. We gave them the option to end that suffering, by showing them what they had lost, by showing them what they had never truly been allowed to be." Commander Zexai leaned back in his chair, feeling the full weight of galactic politics settling on his shoulders. "The other species are terrified. Half the Galactic Council wants to reinstate the ban on human involvement. The other half wants to establish formal protocols for human psychological intervention." "What do you want, Commander?" The question caught him off guard. "I want to understand." "Dr. Kane mentioned that you have psychological profiles of every galactic species, including mine." "Yes." "What does my profile say about how I'll handle this knowledge?" Admiral Torres smiled, and for the first time since he had met her, it seemed genuinely warm rather than calculating. "Your profile indicates a being capable of growth, Commander. Someone who can hold complex ethical contradictions without breaking under their weight. Someone who will struggle with these revelations but ultimately use them to make better decisions. And if you're wrong, then we've misjudged you, and you'll make choices that we can't predict." Which would actually be refreshing. Commander Zexai laughed despite himself. "Are you saying you want to be surprised?" "Commander, we've been analyzing galactic psychology for 300 years. Surprise is the rarest gift in the universe." After ending the call, Commander Zexai remained at his desk for hours, staring out at the stars and thinking about choice, knowledge, and the price of both. The human intervention had saved galactic civilization from the Veltar threat. It had also demonstrated capabilities that made every other species question their own nature and autonomy. The humans remained in voluntary exile, monitoring galactic affairs from their distant system, ready to intervene only when civilization itself was at stake. They had the power to psychologically manipulate any species with surgical precision, and they used that power only to give others the freedom to choose their own destiny. It was the most terrifying mercy imaginable. As he finally prepared to leave for the night, Commander Zexai's communication system chimed with an incoming message. The source was listed as Earth Strategic Studies Institute. The message was brief. "Thank you for your trust. We hope we proved worthy of it." Should you ever need to understand the complete truth about your own species, you know where to find us. Commander Zexai stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Some knowledge, he decided, was too dangerous even for those wise enough to seek it. But as he walked to his quarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the Sol system, ancient humans were watching the galaxy with patient eyes, ready to offer the gift of terrible truth to any species brave enough to ask for it. And perhaps, he thought with a shiver, that was exactly as it should be.